August 5, 2026. A 36-year-old man walked out of custody in Contra, Costa County, California. He was already facing felony burglary charges. Police say he had been accused of breaking into occupied homes. He had been placed on home detention. And just one day earlier, authorities had taken him back into custody for allegedly violating the rules of that detention. But on August 5th, a judge ordered him released on his own recognizance. He was referred back to electronic home monitoring. 24 hours later, a retired engineer named Todd Stewart was dead. He was 68 years old. He had lived in the same quiet Martinez neighborhood for decades. He had a wife, 2 daughters, friends who described him as generous, mild-mannered, and always willing to help. And according to prosecutors, Todd died after confronting a man who was trying to burglarize his home. That man, authorities allege, was the same defendant who had been released from custody the day before. His name is Marcos Iriarte-Valdez, and the question now hanging over this case is difficult to ignore. How did someone already accused of residential burglaries and then accused of violating home detention end up back on the street just hours before another family lost a husband and father? This is the case of Todd Stewart, and it begins months before the killing. On April 29, 2026, police were investigating residential burglaries in Orinda, an affluent community in Contra, Costa County. Authorities say 2 occupied homes were targeted. One belonged to an elderly couple. The woman was 83 years old. According to local reporting, a laptop was taken from the garage. Food was also allegedly taken from the home. A few doors away, another resident reportedly encountered a man attempting to get into the back of her house. She saw his reflection. She screamed, and the man fled. Investigators eventually identified Marcos Iriarte-Valdez as a suspect. He was charged with felony burglary offenses. He pleaded not guilty. Those charges were still pending when the events in Martinez unfolded months later. Iriarte-Valdez was not being held in jail while waiting for the burglary case to move forward. Instead, he had been released before trial and placed under electronic home detention. Pretrial release is an important part of the American justice system. Being charged with a crime is not the same as being convicted of one. Defendants are presumed innocent unless prosecutors prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Courts must balance that principle against another responsibility, protecting the public. That balance is at the center of what happened next. On August 4th, police say Iriarte-Valdez was taken back into custody. The reason was an alleged violation of a home detention monitoring rule. Exactly what happened with the monitoring violation has not been fully explained publicly, but the sequence of events is clear from police and court records cited by multiple local news organizations. He went into custody on August 4th. On August 5th, he appeared before the court, and the judge ordered him released on his own recognizance. He was referred back to electronic home detention, but there was another problem. Martinez Police Chief Andrew White later said his understanding of the records was that Iriarte-Valdez did not receive replacement electronic monitoring equipment until Friday morning, August 7th. That would mean he was not electronically monitored during the day of August 6th, the day Todd Stewart was killed. Local reporting indicates the ankle monitor Iriarte-Valdez had previously been wearing was removed when he was taken into custody. After his release on Wednesday, he apparently was not fitted with another one immediately. The new monitor was reportedly placed on him Friday morning. By then, prosecutors allege the killing had already happened. Thursday, August 6th began like an ordinary day on Francis Court in Martinez. This was not a neighborhood accustomed to violent crime. Todd Stewart had lived there for more than 3 decades. Some reports put it at close to 40 years. Neighbors knew him. They expected to see him outside. They remembered him waving. They described the neighborhood almost like a small cocoon, a quiet place where people felt protected from the kind of violence they saw on television. Todd was retired. He had worked as an engineer. Friends said he enjoyed golf. He and his wife were reportedly beginning to spend more time together in retirement. They traveled. They had raised 2 daughters. On that Thursday afternoon, neighbors said Todd had been working on a project around his garage. Nothing about the scene suggested that within minutes, he would be fighting for his life. According to one neighbor, Todd's wife had noticed a gray SUV near their home. The vehicle had apparently been there for some time. She thought perhaps the driver was visiting someone or waiting for somebody. It did not immediately seem threatening, but surveillance cameras were recording. Those cameras would soon become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the investigation. At approximately 5:09 p.m., Martinez police began receiving multiple 911 calls. A man was being attacked outside a home on Francis Court. Surveillance footage, later broadcast by local television stations, captured part of the confrontation. Todd can be seen struggling with another man. The attacker appears to be wearing dark clothing in a protective or tactical-style vest. Other footage showed the individual with gloves and sunglasses. Todd's screams could be heard on the recording. Police say he was stabbed multiple times. When officers arrived, Todd Stewart was outside his home. He died at the scene. At first, investigators did not have a named suspect. The attacker had fled. Police said a Cadillac SUV was connected to the scene. The surveillance footage did not provide investigators with a perfect image of everything they needed. The suspect had apparently taken steps to conceal his appearance. But police had two major advantages: cameras and a community that was paying attention. Investigators began looking at the vehicle. They used automated license plate recognition technology. These systems record license plates as vehicles move through areas covered by cameras. Investigators can use that information to reconstruct where a vehicle may have traveled. At the same time, tips were coming in from members of the public. People recognized the SUV. Investigators began narrowing their search. Eventually, police say they identified a vehicle connected to Marcos Iriarte-Valdez. It was found near his residence on Ashwood Drive in Martinez. The case had suddenly changed. The man police were investigating in Todd Stewart's killing was not a stranger to the local justice system. He was already a defendant, and he had been released from custody the day before Todd died. Police placed the residence and vehicle under surveillance. Detectives continued collecting information. They obtained an arrest warrant for murder. They also obtained search warrants for the residence and vehicle. On Friday evening, August 7th, the Central County SWAT team moved in. At approximately 6:23 p.m., authorities arrested Iriarte-Valdez. Police said he was taken into custody without injury. The initial bail amount was set at $1.1 million, but the legal situation soon became considerably more serious. On August 12th, Contra Costa County prosecutors announced formal charges. The district attorney's office says that at approximately 5:10 p.m. on August 6th, Iriarte-Valdez stabbed Todd Stewart with a knife while committing a residential burglary. Prosecutors allege Todd confronted him. They say Iriarte-Valdez attempted to leave and then killed Todd during the encounter. He was charged with murder. Prosecutors also filed a special circumstance allegation. They allege that the murder occurred during, immediately after, or while fleeing from a residential burglary. There was also an allegation that a deadly weapon, a knife, was used, and prosecutors allege the crime occurred while Iriarte-Valdez was already released on bail or his own recognizance in another criminal case. If the special circumstance allegation is ultimately proven, the consequences could be severe. Prosecutors say he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. But those allegations have not yet been proven at trial. Iriarte-Valdez appeared in Contra Costa Superior Court and pleaded not guilty. Judge David Goldstein determined that he represented a danger to public safety and ordered him held without bail. His next court appearance was scheduled for September 1st, and that brings us back to the decision made only days earlier. Why was he released? It is an understandable question, but it is also one that requires caution. A homicide committed after someone's pretrial release does not automatically prove that the original judge acted unlawfully. Judges make release decisions using the information and legal standards available to them at the time. Defendants awaiting trial have constitutional protections. They have not yet been convicted, and California courts, like courts across the country, must consider whether someone can safely remain outside jail while a case proceeds. But this case presents an especially difficult sequence. Iriarte-Valdez was already facing serious burglary allegations. He had been placed under home detention. Authorities then accused him of violating the rules of that detention. He was arrested. He returned to court. He was released again. And police say the electronic monitoring equipment was not restored until after Todd Stewart had already been killed. That timeline is now driving public anger. A legal analyst interviewed by CBS Bay Area said cases like this force people to ask whether public safety is receiving enough weight in some pre-trial release decisions. Todd's neighbors were more personal. One said she believed the killing could have been prevented. Another questioned why the defendant had been given another opportunity to remain outside jail. But the court process is not the only controversy surrounding this case. The Department of Homeland Security has now become involved. DHS describes Iriarte-Valdez as a non-U.S. citizen from Venezuela who also holds Spanish citizenship. The department has publicly labeled him a criminal illegal alien and says Immigration and Customs Enforcement has lodged an immigration detainer. CBS reported that DHS says he originally entered the United States legally nearly 2 decades ago. However, there is still an important gap in the public record. ABC7 asked federal officials to clarify his full immigration history and current legal status. According to the station, DHS did not provide that clarification. That distinction matters because immigration has quickly become part of the political argument surrounding Todd Stewart's death. DHS has criticized California policies and called for Iriarte-Valdez eventually to be turned over to federal immigration authorities. California Governor Gavin Newsom's office has pushed back. His office says nothing in California law prevents federal authorities from enforcing federal immigration law and argues that the federal government should be responsible for carrying out its own immigration enforcement duties. Those are political and legal disagreements. They should not be confused with what prosecutors still have to prove in the murder case. For Todd Stewart's family, however, the debate is much more immediate. They are not dealing with an abstract argument about criminal justice policy. They lost a husband, a father, a neighbor, a friend. People who knew Todd described him as kind and devoted to his family. A family friend told ABC7 that Todd regularly contributed to his church community and would be remembered for numerous acts of kindness. For decades, Francis Court had been his home. Then, in a matter of minutes, everything changed. One neighbor described the strange feeling of looking toward Todd's house and still expecting him to appear, to wave, to talk across the fence. That is often the part of a murder case that gets buried under court filings, political arguments, and headlines. Before Todd Stewart became the victim at the center of a national story, he was simply Todd, a man his neighbors knew, a husband whose wife expected him to come inside, a father whose daughters expected there would be more years ahead. And now his name is connected forever to a question about whether the system had a chance to prevent what happened. There are still things we do not know. Investigators have said there was no known relationship between Todd Stewart and Marcos Iriarte-Valdez. Authorities have not announced evidence suggesting the two men had a personal dispute before that afternoon. The prosecution's theory is that this was connected to a residential burglary. Much of the evidence has not yet been presented publicly in court. The defense has not had an opportunity to challenge the prosecution's case before a jury. Iriarte-Valdez has pleaded not guilty, and under American law, that means the allegations against him remain allegations unless and until prosecutors prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. But some facts in the timeline are already established. There were burglary charges. There was pretrial release. There was home detention. There was an alleged violation. There was another arrest on August 4th. There was another release on August 5th. Todd Stewart was killed on August 6th, and Iriarte-Valdez was arrested for his killing on August 7th. 4 days, 4 events, and one question that is likely to follow this case long after the headlines disappear. Was Todd Stewart's death an unpredictable act that no court could reasonably have foreseen? Or did the justice system receive warning signs and fail to act on them? That question cannot be answered by political slogans. It will require court records, evidence, a careful examination of exactly what the judge knew on August 5th, an explanation of why Iriarte-Valdez was released after the alleged monitoring violation, and an explanation of why electronic monitoring was apparently not restored until after the killing. Those answers may determine whether this becomes simply the story of one alleged killer, or something larger, a case about what happens when the presumption of innocence, pretrial freedom, electronic monitoring, immigration enforcement, and public safety all collide. For Todd Stewart's family, none of those answers can change what happened on Francis Court. But they may explain how a man walked out of custody on Wednesday, and by Thursday evening, another man was dead. The criminal case against Marcos Iriarte-Valdez is still ongoing. He has pleaded not guilty, and until a jury reaches a verdict, he is presumed innocent of the charges against him. But for one quiet California neighborhood, life before August 6th and life after August 6th will never be the same. Todd Stewart had spent decades building a life there. It took only minutes to take it away.